Tony Cragg, and I'm a sculptor. I was born in 1949 in England, in Liverpool actually, but I didn't, everybody asks, I didn't know the Beatles, and I didn't grow up there, I just was born there. My father was an engineer, an electrical engineer that worked in the aircraft industry, and he was involved in many aircraft projects. So as a kid, I think I went to 7 schools in all, just moving around. His history is working on military aircraft, on the Comet, the Trident, the Concorde and the Airbus. So he had a history of working in that industry, and we, as a family, just moved around. So his father, my grandfather, he was a farmer in the south of England, and I always had the impression that my father was just totally happy that he didn't end up having to work on the farm. And he was really belonged to that generation that believed that science and technology would solve all our problems. And so growing up and moving around in schools, it was much easier for me to study science subjects, to be honest, than to study history, where different schools have different curricula or a language or something. So I ended up being more interested, and actually for a long time I imagined I would be doing something in a sort of technical way. I was interested in geology, always been very interested in, and I've collected since I'm 9 years old, fossils and stones wherever I go. It's a bad habit, but I continue to do that. And so I could imagine in something in that direction going. And I had the opportunity after school, my school period, to work in a laboratory as a laboratory assistant, not a scientist. I mean, just working there, putting the experiments together and all those kind of things. And then, I mean, I can say that I can't actually ever remember having an art class. But working in the laboratory was a bit of a, you know, it was 1967, 68, and it was a really exciting time. It was fantastic. I was living in a city north of London. It was a fantastic time for rock music, pop music. There was an enormous amount going on, and I and my friends, we went to all of these concerts and whatever, every Saturday, Friday and Saturday and so on. And life in the laboratory was pretty boring. And out of that, I started to draw. I wouldn't think of it as drawing. I doodled and wrote some crazy stuff. And then just at a point of being really not happy in the laboratory, I had a girlfriend. She suggested, well, you know, the drawings are not that bad. Why don't you apply to an art school? And it was for me like a really original idea in a way. Unfortunately, much more an original idea from my father. He was really very upset about that and continued to be. And so I went to art school in the west of England, in Cheltenham. Was the first place I went to, and it's a fantastic 1969, fantastic time. Me in the first time meeting art interest people, knew nothing about it, and it was there. I was on a general course, but where we did ceramics and all sorts of things, and among other things we said we'd do a sculpture course, which I was decidedly not interested in, and then very unwillingly started to make a sculpture and just got totally involved in it. And so that was the beginning, in a sense, of my work. As I said, and I wasn't really interested in art. I'm not really seen. But even as a young person, things kind of, in Britain, you couldn't avoid the fact that there was a Henry Moore, as you couldn't the fact that there was an Andy Warhol. I mean, the very famous artists of the time kind of came through in the popular culture. But even when I started to make things, I didn't think of it as being sculpture. I thought it was more like what I can do with materials. And so I didn't think of a style or something or any particular artist that would influence me. Once I did start to make stuff, then immediately there was criticism. Oh, well. And one of the first things that somebody, a tutor or somebody said to me, well, this is arte povera. And I thought, what the hell, what is arte povera? So I sort of rushed off to the library. And I recently saw the arte povera catalogue, which quite shocked me because it really had a kind of profound effect on me when I was 19, 20 years old. But it, in fact, is a very small black and white catalogue full of very, very unsharp pictures. But it didn't look like art. It looked like, you know, what you do with the real world. I mean, it did excite me. So what I did find out very quickly, that in Britain there were 3 generations of sculptors. There was the Henry Moore, Hepworth, Chadwick, and generation there, Paolozzi. Then there was a generation after that that was Anthony Caro and Philip King and lots of other metal welding sculptors. And then after them, already in the 1969, 70, there was the generation Richard Long, Gilbert and George Barry Flanagan. So they're already only in Britain, and that's all I knew about. There was already an enormous kind of dynamic, and the conversations were tough, with the criticism of each other, and immediately what really came across to me is 2 things. One, it was something important, because the conversations, you don't argue like that if it's not important. And the other thing was the balance between content and form. The one party, the Anthony Caro, obviously, group or whatever, they were purely interested in form. There was nothing one could really discern, some kind of vague poetry. And on the other hand, the others tended to be more interested in a content. But sometimes you just think, well, yes, okay, how does that work with the form? So, but that was immediately something that was very, as a very young person, really affected me. And so I think that that's the main thing that I've been working with. I mean, since the beginning of my own work. Everything you can perceive as having a form affects you in some way. So that is, and I believe that incredibly in a very strong way, because I believe that the material world is in a conversation with us all the time. I mean, I'm looking into somebody's face and I see the most subtle movement of their face, and I know this is a smile or half a smile or it's a grin, but you're reading the most incredibly fine, how big the eyes are, the way the head is. You're reading this small area with an enormous amount of ability to judge the emotional state and perhaps other details about content, about the state of the relationship. So, and then you look at the whole body, and the body is also telling us, you know, what kind of person this is, what dynamic, what movement, what age, what state of health they're in. So you're reading that. But then also the chair. You're in it, so you've got a thing that's you're taking up the form of your body and supporting your body. So this is telling us something as well. But then the floor. So you get to so even this neutral, bland piece of, and this is the trouble with modern architecture. It's so kind of limited. It's flat. It's grey. It's geometric. It gives you not very much emotional possibilities. But you are in a constant. All you have to do is go for a walk in nature, and that's what you're involved in. You're involved in the constant of things on the ground, the things, the plants, the animals, the sky. You're just interested in this total conversation with it. This awareness of the materiality of our existence and this discussion, this conversation with the material world is, I think, something that Duchamp gave us. Not just Duchamp, but I mean, it was a generational thing. He's the person that ends up as being the kind. But so that was the one thing. The second thing he gave us is the relationship of things to language. Because he really related, you understand that every word I'm ever going to say is grounded in the material world. Everything, you know, I'm not just made of material, but I think material. And that is something, I mean, I'm an agnostic. I mean, I can only believe in this. I don't care what other people believe in. That's their business. And I know that belief is a fundamental need of human beings. That's fine with me. But what I believe in, my belief is art, is my politics and my religion in a sense. And what I really believe is that we're in a constant kind of bath of emotions and ideas that sort of affect us. And I think that's really what's important about sculpture. Because sculpture, we live in the sources of the stuff around us is nature, which was wonderful and super complicated and meaningful, but it's taken millions of years to make, even billions of years to make. And on the other hand, what we're mainly surrounded with, if you live in this, is the stuff we've made. All of the clothes, the furniture, the buildings, the whole layer that keeps our naked body from the naked ground. That's our culture, if you like, that's our made culture. And that is problematic for me in a way because it's just made industrially. Industrial systems use the simplest and most cheap, the most economic ways of making things. So we're, in a sense, the form around us is pretty poor. You know, even if you're in a nice area in Paris, and there is some romance attached to walking it down any street, but somehow it's the same pavement, and it's the same windows, and it's not terribly, terribly repetitive. The man-made world is repetitive, boring, and we are responsible for an impoverishment of form on the planet. An impoverishment of form means an impoverishment of meaning, an impoverishment of emotional experiences. So you're actually into this thing, this kind of, and I think that sculpture is one of the only ways that human beings have to make new forms that do not belong to the functioning world. You don't have to sit on a sculpture. You don't have to use it as a knife and fork. You don't. It's just something to think with. It's an expression, and that's really how I see sculpture working. I mean, and a sculptor's work, the actual activity of making sculpture, that I've really feel. I mean, I say it in a bland way. I mean, I feel I've had an enormously privileged life because for 55 years I've been able to be in a studio just looking and thinking about what I find in the material. The material can be endless, infinite number of forms. And all an artist is doing is taking the time and the reflection to see what forms can mean anything. In the beginning of my work, I mean, was really just about, I was a poor student, so I just found the material that I could afford, I mean, even didn't have to pay for, finding, stealing, whatever it was. So, and that was just building materials, sometimes bricks, sometimes bits of wood I'd found, plastic things, whatever it was. And the thing is that with actually doing that, it's been incredibly valuable to me at times. I'm not saying that the work was that interesting, but what it was very part of building up a vocabulary of using different materials and finding out that different materials have different resonance. And it is indeed that. I mean, not only can you use materials in a different way, but I see, materials a little bit like instruments in an orchestra. The violin is very different from the cello is different from the trumpet, so you know what range of meaning you can achieve in some of these things, and sometimes you want to push it a little bit further and whatever. But I do distinguish between the material, but you know, I've not been interested in kind of developing a style. I've been interested in looking at a lot of properties of materials. Different materials can be used in different ways. I mean, there's no doubt, I mean, if you want to use certain wood material, then you have to kind of, you see, I don't like to work with trees, you know, because it's something that I don't. So a lot of the materials that I've actually worked with, are man-made materials. I mean, bronze is a man-made material, glass is a man-made material. The wood I use is plywood. Steel is a man-made material. So all of these things are actually the things that we use normally, plastic, to build this edifice, our cultural thing. So I'm taking that, perhaps the exception is stone, but we still take stone. It's interesting the way we take stone out of nature. We take it out, a kind of rugged, irregular thing, and we cut it into blocks and sheets. We make simple geometries even out of the most natural of materials. And again, that's really, and the way I get away with making things in other materials, getting away from these simple geometries and making it, is very different from when I'm working with a wooden object or if I'm working with a steel object. You know, and for example, the plywood sculptures, they're very good for me because I can build them up. I start with one piece of flat cutout shape and stick the one on top and one underneath, one on top, one underneath, and very slowly this becomes a volume. It's very good for me because sculpture normally is either additive, you know, putting clay or plaster together, or it's subtractive in that you knock bits off wood and stone. But using the plywood in a kind of constructive way, I can build it up, make decisions about it, change it, build it up, take it down, put it up. So it gives me an enormous flexibility in what I'm doing. And it's allowed me to make quite complicated forms. The people always say, oh, they're made with a computer. Well, no, they're not actually. They're made with lots of drawings and with using this technique of building things up in layers. On the other hand, I'm showing in this exhibition some work with steel. What I have done in my new steel sculptures is I've made the work first in a easy to manipulate material. I made them in a polyurethane, built them physically, carved them out, cut them, carved them out, and then we've molded them up using technical means. We don't use nowadays, we don't mold them up by using a lot of plaster and whatever else, or silicon forms. This is a thing of the past, I think, for artists. If you have a form, then you scan it in, and then you have an object which you can actually work with. You can make a mold out of that. So that's but steel is strong. So it doesn't do what wood can do. It stands, you know, so when I can build sculptures in this way that are more fluid, they're more lyrical, they have very thin parts supporting incredibly strong, heavy elements, and that gives them poise. And there's a little almost, I mean, I come from Wuppertal, where Pina Bausch is famous choreographer, so you know, there is a lot of interest in dance in the area I live in. So I'm not saying these are dancing sculptures, they're not, but it gives that kind of feeling about it, yeah. A lot of the work is still based on layering, on particularity, on principles that are real, that were with me when I was a boy, that were real with when I was a student, and they're real for me today. So, and in any group of works I ever made, I mean, I've only just done the best I can, but I know there's enormous potential left and right of what I have done, and sometimes things just come back to me. They've just represented themselves. I don't look for it, I have to say. I'm not very intelligent about it. I'm just in the studio, and what occurs to me is what occurred. When you make a sculpture, or maybe anything, a drawing, there's always it's a sequence of decisions. And really, if it's going on for a long time, the sequence could be very long. I mean, maybe hundreds, maybe even thousands of decisions, how to get there. Along that chain of decision making, there are moments where you feel, oh, you really have to decide which way to go on it, you know? Finish the work, whatever that means, come to a stop, and after the work's you can reflect about, yeah, but what would have happened if I had done it in a different way? Okay, so, and yes, so there is indeed a what if moment. I mean, what if, so, And if there's really this feeling that, yeah, that, because you just know that, you just do that, that's a very different sculpture from that. You know, so it's so simple. And so, yeah, well, wait a minute, I want to go back and research. So I will go back and I will rework it to see, think. The only problem with it is you can't rework it. Because there's an a priori effect, you know the chain and whatever, but you might just deal with one or two key aspects of, you know, how the thing could turn out. So there is that. I mean, that's what I say. When you're working in a 10 kilogram block of clay, there's infinite number of forms. You can make billions and billions of different things out of it. But most of them are not interesting. You know, most of them are, I wouldn't say interesting, but they're meaningless. They have no meaning for us. And it's only when you see, certainly, and that's really all the artist is doing. The artist is moving the material around, and the material suddenly tells you, I mean, you're a writer, so it's the same for you. You write down your sentences because you know what you want to say, and then you realize, no, this is a much better word. You put a different word in, maybe a clause that would emphasize, change the sentence round, and sometimes you write something which is much more meaningful than what you actually wanted to say. This is poetry. This is the moment you've used material to make something not just new, but that actually is super meaningful. And you couldn't have done it without using that material, and that's all an artist is ever doing. The thing is that the work I make, I don't really do very much because it makes itself. There's an inevitability. I mean, and I sometimes look at this stuff and I think, how the hell did I get here? You know, I mean, how did that happen? You know, and that happens a lot. You know, when I kind of think, well, because out of the logic of the past, I would never have expected to end up making this. But the sequence of events that have led me to this is what it is. And the path forward is there. You know, and I've had an incredibly, the work that's in an exhibition like this one is for me very important, is work that I have been developing over the last 3 years. And the main work standing here is incidents. And really what they are is they're just, first of all, there's an interest in the material. Steel, strong, it's the only material that can actually make those forms. You can't make it in wood, aluminium or bronze is totally impossible. Steel is the only material that would actually support those kind of shapes. And it has a fluidity that's not been produced, to my knowledge, by artists working in steel. So it's a new step. It's not about the figure, it's about the essence of the energy necessary to overcome gravity. That's exactly what I see in these things. They're not straight up, simple geometries. They have articulation, they have poise, and they have a certain expressive dynamic about them, which is, I find very exciting. And just working now on new versions of this, which are a little bit more complicated, as always. And so entropy is a big part of life, I'm afraid. But so those works, I'm very happy to see in this context the first time they've been here in France. The other works, like the one here at the back here, the masks, that is still very related to stacking, and it's layers and layers of wood on top of each other, and it's literally two facial masks causing a hybrid and slipping inside of each other. And so that's this layering still going on in the work. The figure here, that's an integer, some elements making one thing, and really what it is, it's also a stacking process, but just I've turned the whole thing upside down, so the stacking no longer is horizontal, it's become a vertical part of the work. So that's all very, I mean, just simple processes in a way, but I'm very excited about the fact, you know, that some of these works, like this is just called Stand, and it just is about the necessity of having you know, all of us need 3 points to stand on. Everything needs at least minimum 3 points to stand on, and 3 pressure points and totally cut out of the material, made hundreds of different forms doing it, and they're the ones that move me the most. So